Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Just give me a couple seconds. I'm just setting everything up on my devices and stuff, and I'll be right back to you in about 2.5 minutes, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. رضي الله تعالى عنه وسادة التابعين وعلماء عاملين وأئمة أربعة مجتهدين ومقلديهم إلى يوم الدين وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. All right. I like it from this angle. All right. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. All right. So, we reached the section in the last section dealing with Tahara. We'll be talking about what is known as the Haid, the menstruation. Haid. All right. And Sheikh Usman Fodia, where you'll see in here, there's certain signs that he's showing here in his scholarship in the Maliki Madhab. You know, it's a little subtle. It's real subtle. Most people who know, but as students, you know, there's little flash bangs that it shows that what he's teaching is from the practice of Imam Malik and those scholars of the school. So he starts off by mentioning about Haid, right? Menstruation. He said that it is a yellowish or like peach-colored blood that issues by itself from the front of the woman, her vagina, that normally occurs even if the quantity flows out one time, right? So, you know, basically, that's pretty much self-explanatory. The maximum period for the woman having her very first mens is 15 days, right? It can't exceed this length of time. This is what this is saying, you know, a maximum period. So if you were writing this down, you know, the max amount of time, if you were writing notes, your maximum amount of time is 15 days, right? The minimum period of purity, okay? The minimum amount of purity for the woman is 15 days as well. So the maximum amount she can be considered a menstruating woman is 15 days, and the minimum amount for her to be clean is 15 days. Okay. Now, this is important to know because, especially as an imam, a teacher, you know, is a common question that is asked frequently by a lot of women, right? It's a common question that's frequently asked by women, especially when it's dealing with Idda, right? Because most of the time, you know, we have that we want that microwave situation where we want to just over. I just want to be out, man, you know. And so what happened is, you know, she'll be like, listen, I have my meds, you know, yesterday, you know, and then the next day she'll be like, it's off, so I'm eligible for marriage again. You know, you want to know exactly because you want to know if she's been clean. Because let's say, for instance, if the maximum amount of days for Idda is 15, correct? Let's say if she's still bleeding day 16, is this considered a mens, or is it just considered, like a false mens? All right, that's the question. Is it still considered a mens, or is it considered a false mens? I'll give you a moment to answer that question for those who are online. Is that considered a mens or a false mens? If you say that the maximum amount of days one is bleeding is considered 15 days, day 16 she's still bleeding, is it a mens or is it a false mens? All right, it's a false mens. It's not. It's not a mens. Day 16, false mens. And let's say, for instance, if a minimum, a woman has to be clean a minimum of 15 days. Let's say she's bleeding, she starts bleeding after day 12. Is that considered a mens or a false mens? Is that considered a mens or a false mens? The minimum amount of days she has to be clean is 15. Right, it's a false mens. So 15 is the marker. It's the minimum period of purity, and it's also the maximum period of it considered to be a mens. Right. So now they said the woman whose menses hasn't exceeded 15 days, but it comes to an end before its normal time or exceeds the normal period, she should add 3 days called istihar, right? Istihar, okay? Like a precaution of her maximum period. So, an example of this is a woman, let's say that she's on her meds for about 3.5 days. She's normally on her meds for about 3 days. I said 3.5. I'm sorry. 3 days. And she's still bleeding. Right? No, I'm sorry. Let me go back. She's normally on her meds for 3 days. She stops bleeding after day 1. Okay? After day 1. She shows no signs of bleeding, right? So day 2, so what this is saying here, by day 2, you still treat it as a mens, right? You would give it a 3-day period, okay? Because she stopped before her normal time, so you give it 3 days out of precaution, right? So let's say she stopped bleeding after day 1, right? No, her normal menstruation duration is 3 days. She stops bleeding after day 1. Day 2, she's dry, right? Day 3, she's dry. Is her mens considered over?
Yes.
No. Her normal duration is 3 days, right? It stopped after day 1. She usually bleeds for 3 days. She stopped after day 1. What you do is you give out of precaution, you add 3 days to it, right? Because sometimes what can happen too, due to stress or whatever, hormones, whatever with the body, you may mens for 3 days, right? And let's say, for instance, so that's one way. Okay. So she has a 3-day duration of a mens. Day 1, after day 1, she stops bleeding, right? She's dry. Day 3 comes, she's still dry. You'll add another day from the day that she stopped bleeding. So it's added you get like a 3-day precautionary period. So after that 3rd day has passed, meaning 3rd day technically being 4th day, right? After that day's passed and there's still dryness, then you treat it as if she's clean. She makes ghusl and she proceeds on. Okay. While she's waiting that period of those 3 days, intercourse is haram for her. She cannot have intercourse with her husband. Right? It's haram during that time. Let's say, for instance, the same 3-day period. This woman's normal days is a 3-day mens. Okay. Let's say, for instance, once again, after day 1, she stops her mens. So that means day 2, she's dry. Day 3, she's still dry. Okay. Day 4, her mens comes back on. Okay. Would she still be considered a person in her mens, or is she considered or is she considered pure?
Mens.
Nope, she wouldn't be considered pure. She would be considered a person on her mens still. Although you had that one day of dryness, she's still going during her natural duration of 3 days, right? Let's say she still continued to bleed into day 4. That's still considered a mens. Let's say she going to day 5. That's still going to a mens. Let's say she continued bleeding. When would she stop being considered a person on her mens?
Day 15.
Day 15. Because remember, a maximum amount of time that a woman is considered to be on her mens is 15 days. So if it's still blood being shown, even after her normal time, she was still treated as if it's a mens, right? Let's say, for instance, 3 days, the duration is 3 days, right? She's on mens for 3 days, and let's say it stop around day 4, right? Now normally her duration is 3 days, right? But she missed the day on the second day, and she bled day 3, then day 4. Then what she would do is she would add those 3 days out of precaution, right? Let's say she started bleeding again at day 7, she's still considered a person of her mens, right? But if she's waiting, she gives herself 3 days. If there's 3 days in this dryness, then she's considered a person of purity, and she'll continue to pick up her regular activity, right? Now, sometimes this does happen if it hasn't reached. Let's say she stopped. Now, let's say if she stopped. Oh, we already talked about the minimum. The minimum length that a woman has to serve in order to be pure. So you wouldn't have, let's say for instance, you wouldn't have a woman that had her mens, and 7 days later she starts bleeding again. She wouldn't be considered a person that's menstruating, because she completed a mens, and the minimum amount of time that she has to be pure is 15 days. Okay. So basically everything is centered around 15. So he says, the Sheikh, he goes on and he says, then she is acknowledged as purified. As for a pregnant women can still have menstruation. They can have a mens while they're pregnant. As for a pregnant woman, the maximum period for her is 20 days, right? She doesn't have the 15 days. She has a 20 day max period. Okay? She has 20 days. So the Shaykh poses a question. He says, is what occurs before 3 days like what occurs after 3 days, or is it like a regular mens? Okay. He said that there's qawlan, 2 opinions. Now, this is where I mentioned about, this is a sign of the within the Maliki school. There's a book that is known as Mukhtasar Khalil, right? It is advanced level book of fiqh, and it mentions a lot of the alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It mentions a lot of the ikhtilaf, differences, right? And you get into it. At this point in our studies, we don't really get into a whole lot of khilaf, right? You more so deal with the things that are known practices, right? But he's mentioning this here, and one of the reasons why I mention it here is because there's 2 sound positions on this, right? 2 sound positions, meaning they're equally strong. Okay, this is what it's saying. So he's saying that there's qawlan, there's 2 opinions on this, 2 strong opinions on this. So he says, meaning 2 strong opinions. He says, if the purity is interrupted, if the bleeding stops, days are considered to be a false mens based on its description. what we just discussed. And after her days of false menstruation, the days of taking precautionary, the woman should do mustahadatun, meaning she should bathe, make the ghusl, and as soon as everything ceases. So this is what just what we just discussed in just a minute ago. So there's two sound positions on there. One is considered men's, one's considered that she's not menstruating, right? And so after her false menstruation, the day and the days of taking precaution, then that woman, this is the woman, this is the one, like we said, the woman that has the 3-day period, right? She does a full day bleeding, it stops, right? At this point, when it stops, and I'm talking about a whole 24 hours, it stops. Begin at that point, if you see blood, you know that she's still menstruating. But if you don't see blood, she still conducts herself as if she's menstruating. Is that clear? It's you give yourself 3 days. If 3 days go by and there's no more blood, then she's to be treated as if she's pure, right? But let's say after the day 3 that she see no blood, and day 5 she starts bleeding again, then she would treat herself as if she was on a men's still, and this will go on. If the bleeding continues, then it would continue until you reach day 15. Once you reach day 15, then regardless whether it is blood or not, she will make ghusl and proceed on. And if she's still bleeding after day 16, she will make wudu after every salat, right? She will make wudu after every salat. Hopefully that's clear. Is that clear for the people online? We'll move forward. So it says she would bathe, and after that, as soon as it ceases, she can then continue to fast, pray, and enjoy intercourse with her husband. So she is considered pure, tuhur, the signs of purity. She's considered pure when there's dryness and that final qasasa, right? That final discharge. Hold on a second. She would make a ghusl after Fajr. Now, and after every salat. That's if she's still bleeding past 15 days. She has to make wudu every salat, right? Her rulings would take the same ruling of a man that has incontinence, urine. He's constantly urinating. After every salat, she would the next salat come in, she would make wudu before the prayer. Even if she didn't do anything to break the wudu, she would still have to do so. Now, so the signs of purity is dryness or that discharge, that qassa, right? So that's that final discharge at the completion of mense. Most people usually get dryness. Some people do get the discharge. Whatever the case is, those are the two signs that you complete with your mense, right? She should wait for the discharge at the end of the specific time. The woman having an irregular mense, she does not have to see if she is pure before Fajr, right? We just mentioned that in the comments about Fajr. Only at the time of her sleep, and at the time of subh. Now, I don't know if you understand what he's saying, what he's mentioning here about where he's saying Fajr is subh, right? Subh is actually when you're is the actual name that the people of Medina use regards to, and it's also mentioned in Hadith, at the time of Salat, what is known as the morning prayer, the dawn prayer, Fajr, right? Those 2 rakats that we pray before subh before the obligatory prayer is what we call the Fajr prayer, at least amongst the Malikis. So she would check at that early morning, at the earliest time where subh, where Fajr comes in. She'll check in before dawn, right? And then, or only at the time before she goes to sleep. So after Isha, right? Ideally, she would check before she sleep for dryness or whether she's still menstruating. And at the morning time when she wakes, she checks then, right? And that's what he's saying. So one more time, recap real quick. The minimum amount of days that a woman is considered pure with no signs of blood is how many days? Huh?
3.
No. That 3 was my example. I'll say it again. The minimum amount of time that a woman has to remain this way to be considered pure is how many days? The minimum. 15.
Oh, that's the total amount of.
She has to be clean 15 days in order for her to be considered, right? The maximum amount of time she can bleed is 15 days, right? The minimum time for a mense can just be 1 gush of blood, and that's it. All right. So, so when we're talking about minimum, that's why I didn't really mention it, say it like that, because usually when you use the word minimum and maximum, sometimes people, they get confused. But the minimum amount of time that a woman could be considered or her mense that she bleeds is just a gush of blood. And that's what he opened up by mentioning this. But, the minimum amount of time that she has to remain pure is 15 days. And the maximum amount of time that she can be considered a person of her menstruation is 15 days. All right. And then you have the 3 days that you take out of precaution. You add 3, 3, 3, 3, and 3. Now, so menstruation, it prevents the sihat, right? It prevents the soundness of salat, prayer, right? Along with its obligations, okay? Now, when a woman is on her menstruation, she's not allowed to be in a masjid. When a woman is on her menstruation, she is not allowed to read from the Mus'haf of the Quran, right? However, if she is a student of the Quran, right, she can recite from memory, engage in memorization of the Quran, but however, actually touching the Mus'haf, they say that some they have someone turn the page for them, right, instead of actually touching the actual Mus'haf in itself. I know you'll see some contrary statements, that's popularly promoted and propagated by the Salafiyya Wahhabi, in their fiqh. They encourage their women to come to the masjid on their mints, uh, read Quran while they're on their mints. You look it up. The fatwas all over the place. They just.
Is it the reading of the Mus'haf? Or is
you can't touch the actual. You cannot touch the Quran.
What about like our phone? We can read it on our phone. Right?
If it's considered Quran, it's not your phone. But when you're reading that, you're still out of that
so
same.
Doesn't matter how you're reading it, right?
Well, if somebody is holding, like I said, I mentioned that if someone's holding the book for you, and they're turning the pages for you, you need to read from it. Okay, fine.
So we can read it from our phones.
I wouldn't do it. It's just like you can go in the bathroom, and you just because you got the Quran on your phone, are you going to sit down and recite the Quran while you're on the toilet?
Well, that's different.
It's the same thing.
Whether you're on or off your meds, you wouldn't recite the Quran in the toilet. I'm just saying if this is a matter of menses,
when you're utilizing the restroom, are you considered pure or impure?
Impure, obviously.
When you're on your mints, are you considered pure or impure? Right. So therefore, reciting the Quran in the bathroom and reciting while you're on the mints is the same thing because you're considered impure. You're not considered pure. If you're considered pure, then there's no restriction on you. Regardless of what the method of impurity, how it makes you, considered to be impure, impurity is impurity. If you're not in wudu, if you're not in ghusl, you know, you're in a state of janaba, you have to be in purity, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Waqiyah, that you can't touch the Quran while you're in a state of impurity. That's why you can't. It doesn't have anything to do with anything other than that. You know, Allah said in the Quran, and then, you know, it's governed, the definite, or what's defined is governed of purity and impurity is dictated by what we understand from, you know, the rules of the madhahibs. But so the same thing, the masjid, you have to be pure to walk in the masjid. It's not permitted to be in the state of janaba, you know, just chilling and hanging out in the masjid. It's a place of worship. You know, when you're in the masjid, you're there, you know, to pray, make the salah. So, you know, you should be, in that case, you know, of course, you know, you could play literalism, like, well, what if, you know, you're there and you're not in wudu, and when you're there to pray, you're gonna make wudu, right? It's not as bad etiquette to sit in the masjid on the musalla, not in the state of purity. So, like I said, this is promoted and propagated. You look, it's all kinds of, they give all kinds of fatwa rulings and everything, you know, of that nature on that, and permitting women. You have to be careful, because this is your ibadah, you know, and there's a certain etiquette, you know, that a person should have, you know, approaching Allah Ta'ala's deen. You just can't approach it any other type of way, you know. The same way when a person is going to court, you know, you see people put on a suit and tie, their best clothing, a job interview, and so on and so forth. So what about your meeting with Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, right? It's greater than those things that you're preparing for. So you should be mentally and, you know, physically prepared when you go before Salah. Now, fasting, it prevents the soundness of prayer with its obligation, fasting with its obligation, right? And I remember some years ago somebody brought that up too. It was, and some of these questions that people ask, I promise you, they're not reading the Quran, because these things are actually discussed in the Quran, right? They're not reading the Quran. They're not familiar with the Quran. So then it became a discussion about, well, why can't a woman fast when she's on her mens? It's like, come on, man. You know, you serious? And they were having like this deep, and everybody, and I never forget, I read this thing. It's probably about 200 comments, maybe more. And he went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think it was me and one other person posted the ayat, and they talked and talked and talked, and we reposted again, and then it finally was like, oh, well, somebody said it is ayat in the Quran. They'd be like, yo, you got to check. Then somebody threw that out there. Well, you got to check and verify it. You going to verify the Quran? So, you know, it's just like, come on, you know. Anyway, so fasting with its obligations, divorce, right? Proper way to get divorced is after the woman has finished her mens, right? Her mens come, it go. Most of the time we do what is known as talaq or bid'ah. You know, he divorcing her in the middle while she's menstruating or whenever. Ain't dudes don't even care. It's just like, yo, I say I talaq you, khalas, that's it. This is an innovated talaq. What they do is they wait until that time goes. If a man divorces his wife while she's on a mens, it counts. The English is misleading, right? How they translate the hadith. It counts. It's just not considered her first mens when it's complete. She has to wait another mens before that mens is considered her first one. So she's actually, in reality, if he divorced her right in the middle of her mens, when she completed, that's not considered her first mens. So, but it does count as one of the three. You see? Now, the initiating of the Idda, right? Like I just mentioned, how that affects the Idda period. So that, you know, divorce is one thing, and Idda is another one, right? Divorce is initiated. It should be initiated after the woman is completed her mens. You can keep track of Idda. It's a sin for the woman to hide her Idda period, right? You have a lot of this going on as well. She has to be very transparent, you know, with the man, whether she's, you know, stayed under his care in the house with him, you know, during her period, depending on the type of divorce they got, or she has to inform her guardian, so that he's, you know, that the husband or the soon-to-be ex-husband is informed about her Idda period, right? All is going dark on each other. You know, it's not, it can't work. So her Idda period, a waiting period, and also vaginal intercourse, right? Or any type of fondling below the waist. Any type of fondling below the waist. Even after the blood has cleared before washing with water, right? Also, if she did tayammum, right? Even if she did tayammum, because remember, if a woman completed her menses, she didn't have water, then it's obligatory for her to make tayammum until she reaches water, right? But because she's making tayammum and she has the ability to pray, intercourse is still not permissible for her, okay? Oh, it does mention in him entering the masjid, touching the Quran, but not reciting it. So she's not prohibited from reciting the Quran, but she's prohibited from touching the Quran, okay? And then the last section, and then we'll be done with this. When we come back, we'll be going over the times of prayer, and then we'll begin the conditions of salat and so on and so forth, inshallah, moving forward. So we'll be going into salat. So now what we'll talk about is postpartum bleeding, right? What is known as nifas, okay, or lochia. I don't like that word. I prefer postpartum. So it's known as lochia, right? It's the blood which is issued as a result of childbirth, wilada, right? When you have a child. And its maximum days, its maximum period is 60 days. Then it stops, okay? It prevents the same thing that menstruation does, and wudu is obligatory with the withholding of the blood, okay? In contrast to the opinion of Ibn Rushd. So Ibn Rushd has a contrary opinion, and this is why he's mentioned as meaning the opposite of what was just said, okay? And that concludes. And now, just one other thing too, as students, I don't know how much further you're going to continue to go on in your studies after this, but if they quote a particular person that has an opinion that's different than what is being stated, then usually that's being understood as that person is the one who stands on just that opinion alone by themselves, and the majority doesn't necessarily agree with them on that. Of course, it's based on some sort of evidences. But understand, if they quote a name like that and say such and such has a contrary opinion, like he just singled out Ibn Rushd, he said this is in contrast to the opinion of Ibn Rushd, right? And Ibn Rushd, of course, is a faqih within the Maliki school, within the Maliki school. So if they quote and single out a name like that, it's telling you that he has the contrary opinion, and he kind of like stands alone on that. Okay, so here you're starting to learn, as it's prepping you to go further in your fiqh studies. So inshallah, with that, we'll stop there today. Inshallah, any comments or questions, for those online, you can type them in the chat. This video will be uploaded, to the group and to YouTube, inshallah. So with that, I guess we'll stop there. Any comments or questions? You got 10 seconds before I'm out. This video will begin to self-destruct in 10 seconds. Ding, 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 ding. All right, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.